Call this meeting to order. Somebody want to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion made, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none? Carries. Approval of the minutes for July 11th, 2016.
So moved. Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Tonight we have a public hearing. It's a conditional use permit to construct 11,560 square foot addition to the west side of the existing public school building that's Lincoln. Who's going to take that one, Ben?
No.
Give that over to Ben.
Okay, so
We called this public hearing, I better call it.
6:31.
Okay, Ben?
All right, got that photo up on the there. This is at Lincoln School, from the school district, part of their recent proposals for the budget and all that was for money was to add on to the school. We're looking at an addition right in here, some parking area here, got outdoor play areas identified, as well as a potential future expansion. So one of the questions I think we need to ask tonight to clarify is just, how solid is that expansion? Is that something they're asking for tonight, or is it just for informational purposes? Maybe a whole stormwater pond, together, if everything we put together for this. So it requires a conditional use permit because it's a addition to the public school. Here you can see what they're planning to use it for. That's the classrooms, the one here, some office space. Other uses. I will leave it at that for now. Unless there's questions.
Okay, at this time, petitioning, I suppose they should speak.
That's, yeah, that's for protected group.
Okay, come up to the podium and state your name and address, and who you're representing, and go from there.
Larry Filippi, resident of Little Falls. We're here on behalf of the Little Falls School District to answer any questions you have in regards to the addition. Pretty straightforward, single-story addition, and I think the square footage actually may be reduced a little bit on the building size to about 10,500, but it's basically projecting out that side of the building. Extending the bus drop-off parking along the north side of the property, retention pond, working with SEH to have on-site stormwater retention for the city requirements. Existing green space, future expansion, I don't know what the reality is of that. It's not exactly sure. There was some interest from one of the groups at one point to self-fund and put an addition on that supplement this, but I don't think that's really going to be much of a reality. So, but outside of that, it's early childhood family education addition. That's going to help the district pool all their resources in that one building for the pool and town. It also frees up some space up at the Lindbergh School, which is going to be converted into some offices, and then they're going to expand some cafeteria space as well as open up their the gym so it doesn't cross-serve gym and food service at the same time. So with that, I can answer any questions you would have. Timing on our project, we looks like the plan would be tried to out the bid by the second week in September or sometime in mid-October, and at least get the footings and foundations in and work over the winter to have this open by fall of 2017 school year.
The outside construction materials, I suspect, similar to what's
Actually,
existing?
yes, I got a brick sample that actually, even though the company that made the original brick is no longer in business, they do have a brick mash that comes pretty close. They're going to actually salvage a little bit of the cast stone that's on that west side that we're letting up to implement or put that in some of the entrances. There might be a little bit of area up on top of it on a small band of the metal panel, but for the most part, it's pretty close to exactly what they have there. Even the windows are going to match, so it doesn't stand out.
It'll take a few years of sunburning, kind of match them better. Yeah.
Ben or anybody, I suspect all the side setbacks and so forth are well within what's required.
As well as parking requirements.
Okay.
Parking ordinance,
I'll get into my next question. Any other questions for Mr. Filippi? I think it's pretty cut and dry. So it's probably all we need you for right now. Thank you. Anyone else have something to say about this?
I'd like to ask, probably Ben Olson or Greg, I don't know that you folks would have the answer to this, but are the ordinance changes that are coming up later,
Let's stick to this one.
well, it is to this one. I'm asking if the changes in the green space in residential zoning is because of this development. Does this not meet that requirement, or?
It has nothing to do with this application.
Okay, so this plan meets the existing green space ordinance, that you have to have 25% green space in a residential zone.
This one I believe it does, yes.
Yeah, because
Okay.
there's a lot of property just south of 3rd Avenue that's also considered school property, and that's all in on that's the playground area and the old basketball court.
Yeah, I have one other question. This retention pond, is it going to be fenced and secure because that's an elementary school? I have concerns for the safety of the kids that go there.
Yes, actually, that was a requirement of the civil engineer.
Oh, good. How high a fence is it going to be?
4 foot. 4 foot high.
That age kids that go to that school can easily get over a 4 foot high fence.
That's why we have like supervisors and everything watching the children too.
Right,
They're
but
gonna be supervised.
this is, there's a playground close to there. In fact, there are several playgrounds, including a city one. And, okay, so I'm going to make an objection and suggest that at least a 6 foot high fence be placed there instead of 4 foot, for the safety of the kids.
That retention pond, is that gonna be holding water, or that's just,
I don't know what the
Holding
duration
pond.
is. I could, obviously we could find it out from the civil engineer on what
Obviously, I don't know.
24-hour rain event, how much water would hold for how long.
right?
I don't think
That's my guess, it's not gonna be 3 feet of standing water there.
I don't think you're going to see.
24/7,
Yeah, I
so-
don't think you're going to see standing water more than a day, but
City code does, it kind of lays out the preference in terms of the types of stormwater treatment. Infiltration will be the first preference, and then it goes down from there to ponds. And so the first one that they would be looking at obviously would be infiltration. Depending on what type of soils you see over there and what infiltration rate you get is going to depend on how fast it goes away. Now keep in mind, the pond only has to treat the new impervious surfacing, so 10,500 square feet, I think is what you said. That's what it has to treat for that site. So there's going to be some, but not a whole lot going through that area.
Just a comment. For instance, the holding ponds that are on the north side of Key Row Apartments, that's a 6 foot high fence.
Those are actually, they're not holding ponds, but yes, that's a 6 foot high fence.
Right.
And that has water standing in it 24/7.
You're talking about the lime?
Line would move it.
Something
My
like
guess
that
is
would
this
be
is something like
safer.
Bernie's on the
Yes.
corners,
Yep.
like all your other holding ponds, it's not gonna be standing water like your
I suspect that's probably going to be a lot like the rain gardens we put in.
right.
Especially if it's set up with sands and gravels and stuff where the water can seep through real quick. Anyone else? time I close the public hearing, it's 6:40. And we'll discuss it amongst the group here. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I think this will be a nice addition to Little Falls West Side and the entire community, so I would make a motion that the conditional use permit as requested be sent on to the council for approval.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion made by Ray, seconded by Jeremy. Any discussion?
Do we need any other conditions or anything on there?
I would require the final stormwater design to be completed.
Well, it's standard for a permit, huh?
Sure.
Everything we got on there is pretty much has to be met definition, so it's wrong.
So how much of this falls back into the state's hands, being education?
The plan review will be the state, and depending on if the state wants to have our building official do the inspection or not, that's decided at that point in time. They'll do the overall plan review of the site or of the building.
And just to add there too, you know, to the north, there's tennis courts, the east, it's nothing but the range, we got the manor to the north and playground to the south, and with one resident on the corner, so it's not like there's a huge impact in that
Correct.
neighborhood.
Were you planning on putting some fencing on, say, that west side, or
It is fenced currently,
just gonna leave that there?
it's got 4-foot fence all the way.
Yeah.
Remember? Specifically about walking kind of fence.
Yeah, this is parking lot. Okay, any more discussion?
As far as that entrance there, is that gonna be, any shipping right on the corner like that?
It should
Be in a one-way?
Being that it's just a one-way in, not exiting right there, there shouldn't be an issue with that.
I shouldn't know if the stop sign there, but
If it was an exit,
two-way?
then we would have,
Okay.
we would have some potential conflicts, but with it being in, there shouldn't be.
And that is a four-way stop there anyhow. So is that gonna be bus and pickup there too? Is that what the plan is along that one way?
Well, they can come in
Right.
the corner a little easier than go down along the side.
Okay. And then I seen you guys had a sidewalk there on the south too. You have a sidewalk on the north and the south. Is that gonna be an exit?
There are, because of the requirements at ECFB, is any classroom over 10 kids has to have a second way out of the building.
Okay.
Whether or not it actually is a sidewalk, but there are doors off that south side
Okay.
of each classroom.
So that's why I don't know if you're gonna tie that sidewalk together to get around that building, the north and south one.
They're not gonna try to utilize those doors as much, except for going out. It's
For
the
emergency
secure
exit.
aspect of these schools, they're trying to channel everybody in through one main door, so I don't see a lot of those secondary doors being used outside the main, see them during school hours.
Yeah, they keep all
Well,
the
just like
doors
a
locked.
sidewalk to nowhere, just that's why I just
Yeah.
don't really tie into the playground one, and I don't, there's nothing on the street and nothing, the fence there to get out to the road, so. It's just a little confusing with a sidewalk to nowhere, you know.
You get a lot of softballs on that road.
Oh, no, that's one of the left word. That's hockey right there, to the left hand.
No, it's not one
Oh, with the little practice field?
still a
ball diamond in there, isn't it?
Yeah, on both sides.
Yeah, but you can hit them on
Where they're gonna put the addition.
You can hit them up on the existing buildings, so that's a little closer. You can have people trying to get up there like we used to do and get their softballs back.
Probably not be much of a field if you're gonna have a potential house there.
No, it's gonna have to be a kid's field.
Probably, I guess. You're allowed to go bust out on that side of the school.
Maybe. Anyone else? Motion made, seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Yep, I think it'll be a really good addition to the west side of the school.
Okay, see ya.
Thanks, guys.
Okay,
Greg, my guess is they know it's gonna be on Monday.
What's that?
My guess is they know it's gonna be on Monday.
Yes.
well, we have another one. Immediately, okay. We'll call this meeting to order at 6:45. It's concerning purpose of amendment or to lower the maximum allowed impervious coverage on residential zone property to eliminate a requirement to match average impervious coverage of nearby lots. Again, who's going to handle this one, Greg?
I'll start it out and then turn it over to Ben. There's a number of different code amendments that we're looking at doing to Chapter 11. A lot of it, like I said, deals with the impervious surfacing. There's also some that deals with the fence location and the fence heights. This was kind of brought around by a number of things. We had some complaints on some properties, and then we also noticed when we were reviewing the requirements with applicants about the fence height, fence location. If you recall, this current ordinance is one that we recently updated probably about 3 months ago. And so we've started to see some of the idiosyncrasies with some of the language in there and how it works with the odd lots, if you will, throughout the town. So we've had situations where side yards they can have a 6-foot fence currently, but the front yard needs to have a 4-foot fence currently. There are some properties where the front yard is on the same street side as the side yard. And so one guy can have a 6-foot, but the next one over has to have a 4-foot. And so it kind of jumps up and down like that. And trying to explain that to the applicant, and common sense doesn't necessarily always come into play with, well, he can have a 6-foot, I can only have a 4-foot. It doesn't pass the smell test. And so we're looking at updating some of those idiosyncrasies to try to make it uniform to everybody. And so we spoke with the police chief as well as the fire chief just to see if they had any issues with a 6-foot high fence in the front yard, just to make it consistent all the way around. Both of them were okay with increasing that height to 6 foot. So tonight we do have the proposed amendments in front of you, and I can let Ben talk about some of the other stuff there as well. If you recall, at our last meeting, actually we had an applicant looking to put a garage on his property. The current code did not allow for that amount of impervious surfacing because it had to meet the average of basically his neighbors. Even though his neighbors didn't have as much as what the code allows, he would potentially have been denied if we were to vote on that just because of the way it's written. So knowing that we've got those situations, plus we've got situations out in the Riverwood area that have much larger lots, we decided to look at kind of a different way of looking at the impervious surfacing for a particular property. And I believe you've got it in here, Ben. We're going to a formula-based usage for the impervious surfacing. So everybody, you start with, what is it, 1,400? Actually, no, not 1,400. Right there, okay. You start with essentially 12,000 square feet of impervious surfacing. Yeah, and then above and beyond that, you get 10% of the square footage above 12,000 square feet. But you cannot have an impervious surfacing more than 33% of your lot. So if you take 33% of 12,000, it's your 4,000 square feet is what you're allowed to. So when you get in the larger lots, like in the Riverwood area where there's 2-acre parcels, you can have much larger buildings. But 1,400 is the largest you can have for any one building. So initially what we looked at is kind of similar to what they have in the hydrology modeling, stepping it. So the bigger the lot, the percentage-wise would be decreased a little bit. So if you've got a 2-acre lot, you get 12% impervious coverage. But what we found by doing strictly those breaks, if you had, let's say, 1.9 acres, you could have more impervious surfacing than someone that had 2 acres, just because of where we split those at. So we tried to go to a formula where it kind of gradually increases. If you add 1 more square feet, you get a little bit more impervious surfacing on your property. And keep in mind, it's not just accessory structures, it's also driveways if they're pervious, it's your house, it's all of that combined to look at how much coverage you can have on the property. We felt that was the fairest way to account for somebody that wanted to put in, say, pervious pavers, as well as those that have larger lots would then be able to have larger accessory structures if they so chose. You know, with that, we did get one, before I turn over to Ben, we did get one letter from an individual, which I'll read later on here, inquiring about the amendments here. We can talk about it at that time. But we did look at the AASHTO guidelines to see how the fences applied to that, and maybe I can get into that a little bit later. I guess I'll turn it over to Ben if you want to jump in from here.
Okay. So yeah, there's kind of 2 primary changes here in these ordinance amendments. A couple miscellaneous ones beyond that, but just to take them in order, I guess. The one that came up last month with Mr. Thompson's application had to do with when you make an addition on a non-conforming lot. So you recall he had a 40-foot wide lot, which does not meet the minimum width or size requirements that we have in the ordinance for sort of treating it as a normal buildable lot. And so one of the requirements in our current ordinance was that in order for somebody like him in his situation to add on to their house or to add an accessory building, we as city staff have to look at the surrounding neighborhood and see what the impervious coverage is on the lots within 100 feet of him, and then average those out, and then the applicant in this case would have to meet the average or less for impervious coverage. That gets to be pretty complicated and time consuming and difficult to do without surveys, and at least to do accurately. So something that we kind of noted internally as something we should look at, and Mr. Thompson's application kind of was another push towards that. So what we proposed, like Greg kind of highlighted already, to replace that would be to get rid of that whole thing about averaging out the neighboring properties and just go to a straight limit for impervious coverage on lots. So it wouldn't have anything to do with whether the lot was large or small. It would have similar kind of restrictions and calculations based on all that. So that's down here at the number 5 here. Right now we have a 75% limit for impervious coverage. Greg can go into this in more detail than I can, but based on some kind of standards for how much impervious coverage on the lots before you start to have some issues with stormwater management. 75% figure seemed a bit high. So we went with this new formula that would have 33% coverage up to the first 12,000 square foot lot, which 12,000 square foot would be an 80 by 150 lot, which is kind of a standard lot size in the older parts of town. And then if you have a larger lot than that, you get 10% additional impervious coverage for every square foot above 12,000. So it's a way to kind of avoid a cliff effect, where if we just came up with ranges, like 0 to 12,000 square foot is allowed one number, and 12 to 20,000 is allowed another number. You kind of have these cliff effects where you get to 1 square foot over that number, and it has a big effect on it. So using this formula would have more of a smooth kind of transition and increase in the number of square footage of impervious coverage you do on the lot. So for someone in Mr. Thompson's situation, where they have a non-conforming lot, rather than being limited to what their neighbors have, they would just be limited based on their lot size. And they could choose to use that for buildings, for sidewalks, for patios, for decks, however they wanted to do it. So kind of in relation to that, if we go back up the page here, current ordinance limits the accessory buildings, detached accessory buildings on a lot to no more than 1,400 combined square footage floor area. What we would do in this situation is get rid of that 1,400 for the combined and just leave that to the impervious coverage limit that we just talked about. So if they choose to have a larger accessory building and a smaller house, then that would be good for them. But we would still have the 1,400 square foot limit for any one building. So that we didn't have, I guess, excessively large accessory buildings on small residential lots. So that was the change in those areas. I'll leave it at that for now and see if there's any questions. I don't know if you want to go through this kind of first and take each subject separately, or if you want me to explain the next one too.
I think we should hear the next one.
Okay. The other change, there's a change in here we had to do with fences. And there's kind of two parts to this. One is what is in this proposed language here, and we did tweak this language a little bit, I think, from the first time we put it out for public viewing. But and the other part will have to do with something that's not in these proposed changes, but I'll talk about here in a minute. So what this change here talks about is what happens with regulation of fences at corners or intersections. So if you've got a corner lot, the current ordinance says that you take the corner lot line, so whether you do the corner lot or the other, you go 25 feet back. I think the best way to show this is like that. But you go 25 feet back on each direction of the intersection. So you would take this, starting from this point, you go 25 feet this way and 25 feet this way. And you could draw a line in between those two, and that would be your sight corner that would have to be free of any obstructions. What we're proposing in this change, or at least for discussion, is that would stay the same if it was an uncontrolled intersection. If it was an intersection that had two stop signs, like a traditional four corner intersection, you had at least two stop signs at that intersection. Then that distance could go down to 10 feet from that corner. You can still run that corner from that triangle. And that would have to be free of obstructions, or visual obstructions. It would also allow for the opportunity for somebody to come in to a public hearing and ask for a lesser distance than the 10 feet. We can talk about whether that should apply to just the situation of controlled intersection where they could come in and ask for that, or they could also ask for the uncontrolled intersection. I think when we wrote it up, we were primarily thinking about controlled ones, so that's kind of how it's written now. Discuss that part of that one. So that's the basic change. Greg can get into the engineering standard calculations that go into that. That's different between controlled intersections and uncontrolled, but there is some backing to that. We do have the letter, and one of their concerns is that that would make things less safe and less visible at an intersection. Concerned about people not being able to see oncoming cars or pedestrians or bicycles or whatever it might be. But of course, we're talking about controlled intersections here, so somebody should be stopping at those intersections, and that's the reason for bringing it up for conversation. So that's the first part of the fence and changes that we were talking about. And the other one that we didn't have in the proposed language, and so we would have to schedule that as a separate public hearing, would be to raise the fence height along, right now, and using this as an example, this would be the front lot line, because it's the shortest distance along the road. So the first 30 feet back would have to be kept a 4-foot high fence or less. That's what our current ordinance says. Actually, prior to last fall, it said it had to be 2.5 feet or less in that front yard. So we raised it to 4 feet last fall, and what we're asking now is there any reason we shouldn't raise it to 6 feet? If the landowner chooses to go up to 6 feet because we want more privacy or whatever it might be, is there any reason we shouldn't let them do that? And the Again, that came up partly because we had a situation where, I'll use this lot as an example. Because this first 30 feet back is this person's front yard, even though it's not this person's front yard, well, I guess in this case it is, so it's not an example.
If that lot was cut in half, so you have a west half of that and an east half of that, then that situation would arise.
So you have a situation where we would have allowed a 6-foot fence back here. We'd have to go down to 4 foot here, and then you go back up to 6 foot one here. So it creates kind of a situation where we got that difference in height that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Either we should make this stay at 4 feet, or we should allow all of it to go up to 6 feet as a station. And then we just started kind of thinking about that and saying, well, if we're going to allow 6-foot fence in those areas, and we're going to keep the site running with clear, is there any reason they shouldn't be able to have a 6-foot fence across their entire front yard if they want? So basically, 6-foot fences all around the yard except for that side triangle. We need a discussion on these. Again, we'll have to handle that as a separate hearing, but I wanted to bring it up because that was something we intended to kind of talk about as part of this fence change. So I think I will leave it at that for now.
Okay, at this point, we'll open it up to the public. Does anyone have anything to say about this?
Well, I think, don't you have to read the letters first? That's the way you usually do it.
I do have a letter from the public that I will read, yes.
I think we're all capable of reading, aren't we?
What's that?
I think we're all capable of reading, aren't we?
Here we are. We received this one in the mail. We'll just read through here quick. Since we're unable to attend the meeting, please distribute these comments and have them read in the record. By way of introduction, this is from Don and Deb Rudman, 708 2nd Street Northeast. Our perspectives are based on Don's past work with Safe Routes Minnesota, as well as good common sense. We begin with the question, why are we even discussing a change to the Little Falls fence ordinance today? We are for the citizen complaints about the status quo or new recommendations from city staff. This is what it is about the current ordinance that you find deficient and why. If you are only reacting to a non-conforming fence or hedge, then the code should absolutely not change, but rather the bending structure be brought into compliance. Presuming there is, in fact, a valid reason to alter the current ordinance, why are you considering a change that would reduce the livability and safety of Little Falls neighborhoods? Simply put, any change that allows taller fences, shrubs, or other structures near street intersections reduces sightlines, increases danger for school children, pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers. Why would you want to raise barriers to walking and biking? Why raise barriers between neighbors? Simply ask your city engineer about international best practices. Higher fences at intersections reduce safety and livability in neighborhoods. Ask yourselves if that is the planning recommendation you wish to make. Finally, despite those best practices, you recommend changes to the current code 1103 for corner lots. We would ask that you be consistent in applying those changes to also include interior lots, front and side yards of all properties. After all, our city would look ridiculous if it had more restrictive requirements on interior lots versus corner lots. Don't you agree?
I think you addressed that.
The intent would be to have, and again, this would be at the next public hearing, but the intent would be to have, or to allow 6-foot fences throughout the lot lines.
More uniformity than what we have right now.
Correct.
So if that was the issue, we're actually would make it more uniform. And then you were discussing at 25 feet in for non-controlled intersections. That gives very good sight line. And at 4 feet, you're not going to see any more than at 6 feet.
Correct. The typical height is 2.5 feet. The standard for looking at sight lines is 2.5 feet. Typically, that's about the height of where headlights are at. So if the headlight's shining at 2.5 feet and it hits 4-foot fence, it's not going to be different than, say, a 6-foot fence. When you're looking at a controlled intersection, there's really there's a formula for stopping distance for a particular intersection. There's two components to it. Reaction distance and braking distance. That'll give you how far
You need, and when you see something, when you need to stop. Now, at a controlled intersection where there's a stop sign, you're seeing the stop sign well in advance, you have the reaction distance taken care of, and you're stopped at the stop sign. So both of those distances are essentially zero. That's why we put in the current proposal that would be able to be reduced to the 10-foot, so you could still see around that corner, but you'd have a little bit more flexibility for, as a property owner, because it is a controlled intersection, to be able to utilize that property for whichever use you decide.
The only thing I could see is the spot just before the stop sign between where it used to be 25 feet and the stop sign, where that could be an issue if a kid popped out there because can't see anything, but you're moving at a slower speed just to stop for the stop sign.
Correct.
So-
One way,
One way, yeah.
the other way is wide open. So you're not really doing nothing. You have a 6-foot fence up the corner of the block, and you guys, instead of a kid coming on a bicycle.
Yeah, just
the
running
road,
out for
yeah, it don't matter, a wall or somebody walking their dog can be 4 feet in front of them and be on the road and get ran over, especially if you're gonna allow it up to no setback at all.
Well, and keep in mind that's from the right-of-way line. There's usually distance from the right-of-way line to the curb line.
So throw a whole nother wrench in there, what about alleys? So all alleys are gonna be 25 feet?
Currently, it's
You know-
just from the streets.
So alleys don't matter?
alleys are 6 feet, you can go right up to the property line.
Why
There's
is
a
that?
9-foot setback or an 8-foot setback from the alley right away. So if that guy, that corner lot, the big one, 48152 right there, if he's putting a fence in his backyard, which I assume that is along the alley, it would be to the west right there, he has to be 8 feet away from the right away for that alley.
And there's also
That's like, what is it, Greg, a 20-foot wide right away for the
Typically,
alley?
it's 25 feet. That one looks like it's been vacated, just because the property lines go to the center there. But like the one to the
Here's a
south
better
there.
example there.
Typically, it's a 20-foot right away for the alley.
I think alleys don't have stop signs, to me, it's a natural intersection. Why don't we have 25-foot diamonds in the alleys then? We're doing on roads.
But you don't have road speeds generally through an alley. I mean, I know you can, but,
But you can, let's say.
I know, but what does the reasonable and prudent person do?
Right, this one.
The reasonable and prudent person wouldn't speed through an alley. And if we're gonna try to protect against unreasonableness and imprudence, but we have no laws, or signs and fences aren't gonna help us at all, period.
I don't think the sidewalk thing is really an issue either, because they're gonna have to be the sidewalk's not gonna be inside the fence. It's gonna be on the outside of the fence, with a setback from the sidewalk, regardless of how close you are.
Can we bring up some of this discussion when we have our discussion and let the public finish? Anyone else? Now you can speak.
Yes, I have several things I want to comment on. I have sat in on most of the planning meetings for the last 5.5 years. At the planning session that talked about the new fence ordinance, you folks and these two individuals, Ben Olson and Greg Kimmen, were going to leave fences in the front yard at 2.5 feet. And I brought up that that's a trip and fall, for one thing, and that it wouldn't even keep a dog or a child in. Didn't make any
We're aware
sense.
of that, yeah.
Yes, but the public is not. And I'm making my comments for the public on record on my camera. And I don't think you're supposed to interrupt me when I'm talking during the public hearing time. Okay, so that's one issue. I mentioned when bushes and shrubbery came up, because you guys were wanting to limit that in front yards as well, I mentioned that the hospital on the lot next to me had installed great big arborvitae that were already shoulder high to me, and that you'd have to have them take those down if you enacted an ordinance that controlled shrubbery on a corner lot. Because that's a corner lot on First Street, old highway, one of the main thoroughfares here in town, okay? So the new fence ordinance was, the front yards was only granted because I made the suggestion of 4 feet high. There was no suggestion by anybody of 6 feet high. I also sat in on an appeal and hearings for Scott and Lori Williams' illegal fence in their front yard. You folks made them reduce their fence that was installed at 6 feet high, even through an appeal process, reduced it down to 5 feet. Now, so you are suggesting changes for Olsons who live at 601 2nd Street Southeast, very close to me. They have installed a fence with a city permit, permitted by Ben Olson, that's currently in violation of the current fence ordinance. The current fence ordinance states that no front yard fences can be higher than 4 feet. Their front yard, where their mail is delivered and their address is on their home, is on the west, is on 2nd Street. That's their front yard. In 1999, another person illegally permitted a fence in their front yard that's 6 feet high when the ordinance was 2.5 feet in a front yard. So 2 times, people that work for this city permitted an illegal fence in a front yard on that property of Becky and Aaron Olson at 601 2nd Street Southeast. First of all, that's not fair. It's a violation of your ordinance. It's selective enforcement. And in my opinion, this change is being made to suit one particular family, which certainly is wrong to do. And if I were the Scott and Lori Williams, I would probably file a lawsuit.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
In defense, we haven't made any decision to allow any fence to go to 6 feet. This is a discussion, so being accused that this group has allowed it even before we finished the discussion is really unfair. So I would take your what you're saying and maybe use the words a little differently, because we are here discussing this right now. It's not like we're trying to be unfair or fair, or
We're not even really discussing the height change. That's got to be a separate public hearing. We're discussing the safety triangle.
that's what we're doing. So your accusations are unfounded right now. I just want to say that. And then I kind of remember there was a time, arborvitaes to the east of you, you wanted them higher because you weren't getting your privacy. They weren't taking care of them. These arborvitaes were sickly looking and dying, and you wanted them replaced. It's hard for me to understand what you're asking for. In one way, you're saying you want them gone. In another way, you're saying we have to have them there. So that's really a hard decision to make. Anyway, at this point, is there anyone else who wants to discuss this?
I'd like to use my last comment for 2 minutes.
Is there anyone else who has anything to discuss? You have something to say? Okay. It's
Okay,
your turn.
I'd like to use my last 2 minutes. Number one, I never asked for the hospital's arborvitae to be removed. I stated if you enacted an ordinance that created no arborvitaes taller than 2.5 feet, that those hedges would have to be trimmed or removed. I don't care if they have hedges there or not. I don't know what the purpose of the hedges were. It's none of my business. My point was that you can't set a rule specifically for one person. Now, there are illegal, currently, bushes and hedges. First of all, they're on the right-of-way on the Olson properties. They're not on the property. There's a whole line of hedges outside of where the telephone pole is on Becky and Aaron Olson's property. You can't have stuff in the road right-of-way. And it certainly violates the 2.5 feet high rule. And they have also hedges on the road right-of-way on the front side of their house, bushes that are probably taller than lilac hedges that have been allowed to be there for quite some time. I never stated anything except that 2 different individuals, Elvin Erickson and Ben Olson, have given an illegal permit. So it is a legal permit, but it's a violation of your current fence ordinance, which states no front yard fence can be higher than 4 feet. But it was permitted on May 12th of this year for Becky and Aaron Olson, a 6-foot-high fence. In 1999, a 6-foot-high fence was granted by Elvin Erickson, former city engineer, whatever his title was, to the Olsons. There was a front yard fence, and at the time, the fence ordinance was 2.5 feet high in a front yard. Also illegal. Those were my comments. So yes, I'm not attacking you. I didn't say anything attacking you. I'm making factual comments.
That's not the way I was, time's up, that's
Okay.
not the way I was perceiving it. But anyway, Greg, if there's such violations, I'm sure if you mention it to the proper people, you can check into that. Because I'm not aware of it, never have been, so,
There is provisions to allow plantings in the city right away. I mean, we've got
Okay.
trees.
Boulevards all over the place.
boulevards, yeah, throughout town. Now, you can't have structures in the boulevard, and you can't have things that would obstruct the view. So you can't plant a row of lilacs right along the backside of the curb. That's going to obstruct the view. But we do have plantings throughout town. That's not uncommon. Last week, in kind of preparation of this, just to kind of see how many properties we were looking at, I did just kind of a windshield survey on the east side of town, didn't make it to the west side, sorry.
Thanks.
But just driving around, if you were to look at that 25-foot site triangle,
You know, there's probably 60 to 70% of the intersections would fall into that, where there's something in that 25-foot area. Now, we don't go out every time somebody plants something in a boulevard to see exactly where it's at. We don't know. I mean, they plant them on Saturday, Sunday, whenever they get home from work. But if it becomes a problem, or if there's a site issue that we're notified of, then we do go out and take a look at it. So, I mean, what we're talking about is not just one particular property here. We're talking about quite a few of them that would potentially be out of compliance. And so that's what kind of prompted us to look at this. If we were to look at the intersections that are controlled, to try to see, okay, right now, you know, in Little Falls, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of issues with visibility at intersections. I don't have a lot of people coming to me saying, I can't see around this corner. Even when I'm driving around, I don't see areas where it's just an issue with being able to see as you're getting into traffic. So looking at, you know, where those various controlled stop signs are at, you know, I don't know if you can see this or not, but all the red circles are areas where there's controlled intersections, 2 or more stop signs. So those are the potential intersections that would go to that 10-foot as opposed to the 25-foot. And as you can see, I mean, it would probably take care of quite a few, because we do have quite a few controlled intersections. But there may still be some out there that are within that site triangle, but it at least addresses the vast majority of them, because as you know, driving around town, common sense tells you there really isn't an issue with site triangles and being able to see oncoming traffic at an intersection.
Yeah, you start plumping 6-foot fences up all over all of them, which obviously, you know, how many we're gonna get? A dozen?
Sure.
It's not like everybody's gonna go put a 6-foot fence in their front yard, so if that's what it becomes. But
You know, another thing to keep in mind, I mean, the B2 district currently has a 0-foot setback. So that's another idiosyncrasy of the B2.
well, like, we're not dealing with heights right today.
Correct.
So, we're kind of putting that discussion in the wrong area.
not really, it's all tied together. We're gonna do a site triangle.
Let's close the public hearing at this point, and we'll move on to the discussion amongst the group here. 7:19. Yeah, anyone have anything to say? I'll ask that first.
I'm just trying to figure out how this is going to play out. Specifically, it sounds like we really don't have a lot of objection to the rules about impervious soil. I think some of that makes common sense, and somehow we should try to make common sense out of fences. Am I getting the picture that should we do these sight lines, and if someone's at an uncontrolled intersection and they want to fence their property, that as soon as, that they would have to fence the corner off?
Correct.
They can't go straight out to the corner?
Correct.
Okay.
25 feet back both ways.
Then that's what I just want to make sure that that's the picture I was getting.
Now, if it was at an intersection that's controlled by 2 or more stop signs, then they would be able to go to 10 feet.
So corner lots would be the ones that would probably be primarily objecting to any language here, because interior lots would be 6 foot all the way around the property.
True. True.
If we went to 6 feet.
If you went to 6 feet. I'm just using that as
Yeah.
Couldn't that go with like even, you know, back to the height, if you go just 4 foot budding roadway? You're talking about the ups and downs and ups and downs.
We could.
6
Yeah.
foot on interior property lines and 4 foot on exterior property
Why
lines.
should property owners with a corner lot be penalized?
well.
They
Not
could
to
tell you.
penalize, it's for safety. That's,
That's for traffic needs.
They get penalized and they have to pay assessments too.
they pay assessments.
Yeah, why pay more and get less?
I know.
We get assessed on both streets essentially, but are allowed less rights.
So, yeah, just to clarify, again, under the old ordinance, which I mean, like before last fall, the front yard on a corner lot would be, anything that abutted a street would have to get 2.5 feet less. So this whole stretch would have to be 2.5 feet, and this stretch would be 2.5 feet. And then this is roughly that 25-foot site triangle. You could have had a 2.5-foot fence if that would have cost nothing at all. So then when we talked about it last fall, we said, well, okay, this is the front lot line, because by definition, that's the shortest road frontage, and so that becomes the front lot, this becomes a side lot, corner lot line. And here we said you could go to 6 feet for most of this, and then 4 feet once you get 30 feet back from this front lot line. So in this whole 30-foot area in here, back from this front lot line, you had to be at 4 feet or less, and then the side triangle, you had to be 2.5 feet. So when we started looking at this and saying, okay, I think last fall what we said was, is there the penalizing thing? Should we be penalizing somebody for making them have 2.5 fence? If you look at it that way, on both ends, on both roads. And we said no, and so we allowed up to the 6 foot on the sides. As we started looking at it now, I think the question in my mind anyways became, what are the reasons that we would limit fence height in the front yard more than we would in the backyard anyways? And from what I could tell, looking at, web searches, and looking at other ordinances and all those kinds of things, was it wasn't really, it's primarily an aesthetic issue. It's does the community feel like having taller fences in the front yard somehow devalues property values? Like, because it looks bad, because it looks unfriendly or uninviting or whatever it might be. I talked to the police chief, I talked to the fire chief, I said, do you guys have any objections to taller fences in the front yard? They said they didn't. The fire chief commented that it might even act as a bit of more of a firewall than a fire. Give it a little bit more time, I suppose, to fight a fire. Police chief said, it's not going to be a situation where criminals are going to be hiding behind them, because I'm not really going to have cops peeking over fences anyways. So they didn't really have any concerns. I couldn't find any literature or anything that would suggest that there was anything more than just kind of the aesthetics. I guess there was some conversation about having sight, as you approach an intersection, but we're already dealing with that through the sight triangle. So I think it really comes down to is the aesthetics of it and people's concern that it's going to make the neighborhood look bad or devalue property. Is that enough of a reason to regulate it? And maybe, but that's the reason for the discussion. If it's not, if we basically feel like we need to leave it up to the landlord to decide what they feel will improve their property values or not, then I guess I couldn't see any reason why we would limit it to the landlord.
On aesthetics, one person's idea, maybe the fence looks really nice, another person it doesn't. You put a 4-foot high fence, somebody who is shorter, they can't see over it anyway, so they're not aesthetically, all they're seeing is a fence. A 6'7" guy is gonna see over a 6-foot fence, so there's only a few people that get the luxury of seeing into a person's yard, you know? So,
And I guess we still set the limit at 6 feet, so we're still kind of saying, okay, there isn't a maximum. I mean, we don't want 10-foot fences around everybody's yard, I guess.
a
It's still
6-foot
aesthetic.
fence will contain a dog. I have seen dogs go over 4-foot fences.
But that's why you put it in the backyard.
So
Why should you limit a property owner's ability to use their own property?
Well, then we should get rid of the 30-foot side triangle on the corners too.
That's a safety reason.
That's-
That's
Everybody-
reasonable.
Everybody should have 30 feet back then, because, just because there's a stop sign at one corner, not at the next.
I'm just saying, I see what this person says here, because, you know, shouldn't it be changing it to all instead of, and not the corner lots, whatever. I get the safety, so that makes sense, but aesthetically, maybe it's a real answer, but I'm thinking, okay, so my neighbors want a 6-foot fence, and then I don't have a fence, and she has a 5-foot fence. I mean, it's just, and maybe that's not enough to keep it anyway, but I just think it would look badly.
Most people generally either build a 4-foot fence or a 6-foot fence because that's what your materials come as. Not very many people buy 6-foot pickets and cut them down to 5 feet just because they look cool. I mean, that's where these
Most
numbers
people,
comes
but
from.
we're giving them the
Like
opportunity to
general.
say.
I mean, it is giving them the opportunity to openly interpret it the way they want their yard to look. I mean, I don't see the point in more regulation. I mean, obviously, we have a 12-foot or 25-foot safety triangle set back to address public safety concerns, but why limit people's ability to use their own property more than that?
One of the things about community living is that we have public streets and we do things like water and sewer and all these things to serve a community. And it's safety in the community, fire protection in the community. And with those benefits, then we do wind up giving up some of the liberties, as you will, if we were living in the country. In the country, you wouldn't have to worry about that, but then you don't get the benefits either. So there's that give and take, and that's part of living in a community. There's a lot of places in town that I don't think look good. I wish they would, but I don't think you can legislate good taste.
that discussion will probably, just what you said, will come up when you discuss chickens down the road here too. So, anyway, I guess the issue is,
that once before.
I guess the issue here is, if you put the fences up to 6 feet, it doesn't really infringe on the corners, you know, the line of sight, because we're 25 feet back. 4-foot fence, 6-foot fence, 2.5-foot fence, as long as they're out of that area, does not infringe on your view. So that seems fair to me. I think the big discussion here is that 10-footer, if it's a controlled intersection, or should we just keep them all at 25 feet? Because I guarantee if somebody wants to put up a higher fence closer to the road and stuff, they're gonna start putting in requests for stop signs to try to make controlled intersections and trying to justify why it should be controlled. Well, it should be because you can't see around the corner, you know? So,
I mean, they could put in requests, but there are certain criteria that have to be met in order to justify a stop sign. So we have turned down stop signs in the past.
Do we get any help from other communities' ordinances regarding these issues? League of Minnesota Cities,
With the side triangles?
all of, I guess, the whole ball of wax, fence heights. I mean, we're not the only community facing this.
No, I think side triangles, you know, the ones I've seen anyways, the way they calculate them are kind of all over the place, it's not a set standard. There are some engineering guidelines, I guess we call them, they're not standard, they're guidelines. They kind of set what those can be, and I think we roughly, well, I know Greg looked at those, and those than I do, but, so there's that sense of standards for sightlines. For fence height, I guess what I would say is it's more common to see, 4 foot or less for a front yard. But it's not unheard of to allow a 6 foot front yard. So I guess that's where I was asking myself, well, what would be the reason to limit somebody to 4 feet rather than 6 feet? And it seemed to come down primarily to the look and the feel of the neighborhood. So I think that's where a community either decides that that's enough of a public good, so to speak, or enough of a justification that it's worth doing, or they go the other route. Jim was talking about let the landowner do what they want for the most part, unless it's creating a safety hazard or something like that.
So what's the reason for 6 then? Why not an 8 or 10 foot?
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying is, I guess it's still a middle ground, essentially, if you look at it that way and say it's a 6 foot maximum. Because, yeah, why not go?
Maybe on a 20 footer, you don't like your neighbor's house, and you're 2-story, put a 20 foot wall up there so you don't have to look at it.
We do, actually, the current ordinance would allow for an 8 foot fence.
Where you stop by 6.
If they meet their setbacks, just like a house or building would have to meet, then they can put up an 8 foot fence. So it does allow for a taller fence. Most people don't do it, I think, because, I would suspect, because I think it looks funny and it devalues their property, it's more expensive. And, people kind of self-regulate in that sense, I guess, but,
It is a community thing, because you go to the Lake of the Isles area in South Minneapolis, and they have 6 foot high fences out to the boulevard area, on your main streets and stuff. And that's the section of town where they don't have real big lots either. Right, where the Guthrie Walker Art Institute is, and toward the Lake of the Isles area back there, they have them high fences all over the place.
Well, a lot of those communities wound up with grandfathered areas as well. That's part of
Could
a
be.
lot of old town there.
There's a lot of old buildings, yeah.
Things were done before they had land use regulations. And, unfettered use of property within a city would create all kinds of problems with building sizes and, Lord knows, fences.
The city of Austin, Texas is super successful, and they have absolutely no zoning restrictions.
Yeah, did you see the house made out of beer cans?
Yeah.
Lovely, I'd love that one next to me.
That's the liberties of being American, though. It's yours, you do with it what you want.
I saw a house that was literally made out of straw, and then they put stucco wire on both sides and stuccoed it out. Straw is insulation. But
I think, too, what Greg alluded to before about talking about the number of intersections out there that seem to have obstructions within this 25 foot area is, if we don't change the ordinance, and I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but if we don't change the ordinance, then we're kind of in a position where we either have to start researching and figuring out, has that tree been there for 50 years? Has it been there for 10 years? Does that mean it's grandfathered in if it's been there for 50 years? The fence, same thing.
well, you cut it down, you'll find out how old it is.
Right. So then we have to start looking into those things, and then if we can't determine whether it's grandfathered in or not, then we send a letter and say cut them down. So if we don't change the ordinance, I think that's the questions that we'll have to figure out. Is what do we deal with? How do we deal with it?
If it's a safety issue, and you got some big tree with a 4 foot base on it, things should be removed.
Well, you've got
because
that situation right there on lot 48, 157, 1000. There's a large pine tree, you can see its shadow extending through the intersection. And right at the corner of the triangle, which is probably 25 feet back, looks like that's right where the center of that tree is. So I suppose that tree would have to go, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, it's way up to the boulevard.
Yeah, that
So she gets down to the
intersection
ground,
right there.
that's cut it 8 feet up in the air, so all that's there is the trunk.
I'm just saying, if that's an uncontrolled intersection, and I suspect I don't see stop signs. So that could be one of the,
Yeah, and as we were driving around, roughly 75% of them had something.
So like this tree here.
Yep.
No, you could say, I mean, then you get into, okay, is this an obstruction? Because there's no leaves and branches down here, but
The tree should be removed, it's
Well-
sick.
yeah,
It's all,
how thick does it have to be as the trunk for it to be considered an obstruction?
where'd that pine
What
tree go?
about
Was
the
that
power
right there?
pole?
Oh, there's that
Right
pine
there.
tree.
Is the power pole
That
an
must be the
obstruction
pine tree
then?
there.
Does it have to be moved? I'm pretty sure they're not gonna be happy if you tell them
It's
to come
trimmed
with the
up,
power
so-
pole.
All right,
In that case, it's trimmed up.
So part of the reason to bring this up was, okay, if that's the consequence of leaving the ordinance the way it is, let's make sure that that's really what we want to do. Make sure that those are completely free of obstruction, that we're willing to send letters, have people cut them down and do all those things. And if we decide that that's what we need to do, then I think that's what we need to do. But I think before we start just doing that, we want to have a discussion.
You know, this person's got a tree, now the next person's got a whole row of lilacs there.
Well, it would make, fences make a difference if you've got chain link versus something that's opaque. You can see through chain link, where boards, I don't know if there'd be some way to,
Or split rail,
So you'd rather have the property look like Auschwitz than
Well,
have a nice
I
wooden
mean, there's
fence?
people with,
You've got one of
there's
those
people with
fences.
chain,
Well, I got a section.
there's people with
chain
chain link fences all the way through town. No, I wouldn't like to see
those
that.
daycares.
But I'm just saying,
You're right.
that you have those situations as well.
Daycares have them, chain link.
Sure.
I think they're required to,
Yes.
for safety reasons.
Gives the kids a good toehold to get in.
So I think the basic
Strands of
idea was
barbed wire across the top.
Electric.
if you've got a controlled intersection where at least you're stopping on at least one side of the intersection, or two sides, I guess, and you're stopped anyways, and it's not an issue of having to see ahead of you, so to speak,
Or react to something.
then did it really matter whether there was a tree or a shrub or a fence or a house or whatever it might be in there?
As long as it's not in that 10 foot.
As long as it's not in 10 foot.
And then if it was in the 10 foot and they wanted to come in and ask for, that's a secondary question here, is do we even allow them the opportunity to come in and ask for an exception to that?
Then
They
you
always
might
get
as
the
well
variance.
allow everyone to have them.
Well, I think at that point, in my mind, you would start doing the engineering calculations and looking at the specific, grade and the slopes and, that specific intersection and seeing if it really was going to block, views or not. And if there was some reason why it didn't block views to be closer to 10 feet, then you could allow for that.
Do we allow for people at 25 to come in if it don't block the view too?
Well, that's what I alluded to before. I don't think that was our intention, was to allow for that, but we should.
Well,
clarify
exactly, if we do it for one, we should do it for the other.
I wouldn't, just because in that 25-foot area, if it's an uncontrolled intersection, at least you have time to react to something that's coming from the other way and brake. At a controlled intersection, your reaction is the stop sign. You see that a block or two away already that you've got to stop at that intersection. So by the time you get up to it, your reaction time and your braking time is zero, but it still gives you that 10-foot area in there to see pedestrians or whatever else, a dog, to be able to stop for that stop sign.
Unless it's hidden in the tree,
The stop sign.
right?
Oh, well, if it's sitting in the tree, then it needs to get trimmed
Well, the tree should just be gone,
or gone, depending.
because obviously it's an issue.
Yeah.
So that's why the 10 feet, even on a control, should be kept. That way we wouldn't have problems with stop signs and trimming, keeping it back. 25 is good enough for the people that have it uncontrolled, 10 should be fine for the people that have it controlled.
That's, I think, reasonable to go with the set distance. I mean, why create extra permits for the sake of creating permits? that I agree with sacrificing the 25 feet or the 10 feet for the sake of safety. I mean, I get that. There's a mathematical calculation behind that that's proven. I mean,
Is it
that's
actually-
common sense.
The full 25 feet is actually at a 30-foot speed is what's required, or is it a 20-foot? Or we got a 25 just because that's what it used to be, or?
25 is about where it should be. It's pretty close to where it needs to be, yes. I mean, usually when we run the numbers, it's like 23.8. So you're on, it's 25 to make it even number. But yes, the 25 is where it should be.
I think we've heard enough discussion from the public. We've run this thing back and forth a few times. This is the second time around for us. At this time, I'd probably entertain a motion. Is there someone here who wants to make a motion pertaining to this? And
To the side triangle or to?
So
this, we're gonna do the whole thing,
For
right?
this planning, or for this public hearing, it's the site triangle and the impervious
Impervious.
surface. Those are different, so it has nothing to do with.
Right, so it's tied into one.
Or heights, okay.
Let me, if I could, things that were in the agenda, or the things that are changes, there were two other things. On page, I guess it's on page, the third page of the ordinance language there, where it starts out with D, accessory buildings. We went over number 3 there.
First one. Oh.
Just want to make sure we understand what would be in this if we were to pass it all as we go. So, number 6 under that, that's just a follow-up from when we talked about regulating RVs differently a couple months ago. I just wanted to clarify in that section that, basically the otherwise allowed as the new RV regulations. So that you can limit an RV for 14 days or longer. So that was number 6. Number 8, we haven't really had a lot of conversation about, but you could mix this if you don't feel like you want to deal with it at this point. We have a requirement right now that accessory buildings have boxed eaves on them, and so we've had buildings come in, or applicants come in with buildings that don't have any eaves. So it becomes a question of whether we can allow that. And if that would come in without box eaves. Again, I think that's primarily an aesthetic issue. And so, a lot of pre-built buildings out there that don't have box eaves and I think arguably that's just fine. And so, we were in this section anyways, I thought I'd put that in there too. That is also in there. And then one last comment back on the impervious coverage issue, going down from 75% coverage to 33% coverage. There are lots out there that don't, they have parking lots on them, they have churches on them. In a lot of those cases, there are schools like we talked about earlier tonight. A lot of those cases, there might be more than 33% coverage like we're talking about now, or whatever it would be by this new formula. And so I think we need to think about that.
As far as,
We treat those as variances or kind of language similar to that situation.
so they have more than 33% of the property as building or sidewalk or basketball court or whatever. I have a little issue with that because the purpose of having that 33% is we need 66% for runoff. So if you start making allowances for that, maybe they're required to put in some kind of holding pond that will serve the same amount of runoff.
I mean, like with the schools, obviously they
They put in that,
to address those kinds of issues. I
But
think-
even churches, if they come in and, I mean, they're gonna have the same kind of runoff. It needs to go somewhere and it shouldn't be the neighbor's property.
And there is the citywide sort of stormwater.
The stormwater utility has kind of the schedule for impervious surfacing. So, and this is mainly pertaining to residential properties, but 33% is what everybody here gets a bill for every month at their house, which is stormwater utility of 1. That equates to the 33% impervious surfacing. So this 33% isn't just a number that's kind of pulled out of thin air. It matches the hydrology modeling as well as our current stormwater ordinance in terms of the impervious surfacing that you currently get billed for the various properties. Now, one thing that we could put in here is, unless it meets the requirements of 1120 or stormwater management, because that would then address the requirements of having a pond for the runoff.
So, I mean, like I said at the initial part, there's a few things here that we didn't include in this public hearing that I think we need to address, depending on how we come out of this discussion. Primarily it had to do with going from 4 foot to 6 foot, and then also whether we're going to do interim use permits for these fences that go closer than 10 feet to the intersection. We would have to make separate ordinance amendments for those two. So I think your option tonight is either to say some of this or all of this is good the way it is and let's pass it and recommend it to the council, or you can say let's send the back to the drawing board, bring it back to the drawing board a little bit, make some amendments, and then bring it back again with any other changes that we need to make.
I think I'd like to hear everything at one time, so we don't have to keep sending parts here, parts there. It kind of confuses the public, and in some ways it confuses us. Because we should just read through the whole thing, have the public give their input. We come up with some way to recommend this, either denying it or sending it to the council with approval. But now if we have to have an additional public hearing again, it just seems like we're spinning our wheels, you know?
Well, you're gonna have to do that every time we change a paragraph in here.
Yeah.
You could table it. I mean, if there's something in here that you want to change, we could table it and have some more discussion on.
I think that would be fair to the public and to the board, because we discussed a couple of the items and then they gave their input, but then all of a sudden they added a couple more, which they didn't have the opportunity to give their input. So we can't really make a good decision on that basis. This thing needs to be tabled, or like Ben said, partial approval.
There'd be benefit if there was direction on which areas you'd like us to tweak and to work on, so that the next time we bring it back, that we can.
The tweaking would be the fence height thing. The tweaking would be as far as this.
We had the fence height rule one part of this. Do you want to make it part of it?
Well, I
we should all
think it'd make the most sense to get the fence height and the safety triangle in on
on
the
the same
discussion.
thing.
Yeah, they're kind of beating on the same bush.
Doesn't affect his.
Well, yeah, for
Yeah,
this,
I mean,
for his situation, the accessory building and the impervious coverage would be theoretically addressed now. You could recommend that for approval. You know, what would happen then in terms of the churches and the schools and the parking lots and that kind of stuff is would have to be a variance to go above the, whatever they're done. We can just go with that for now.
That's on anyone in the future, not anything that's
Anything in the
currently
future,
existing.
anything in the future.
So basically what that would be is on an 80 by 150 foot lot that no more than 4,000 square feet
Correct.
could be covered by a house, outbuildings, driveways.
Yep.
Sidewalks,
Pavers.
Sidewalk not included, that wouldn't be city sidewalk.
That's not sidewalk, that's city
That's in a
property.
boulevard.
interior private sidewalks.
But churches,
Basketball
schools,
court, anything.
Correct.
those are businesses, right? And you said this is primarily
This is
residential.
This is
residential.
residential.
But right now, the language applies that to residential properties.
Okay. So how's
Because
it-
there's a lot of churches and schools in residential zone areas.
Okay.
And that's
But aren't they
churches and
considered
schools.
businesses?
So, with, they're in residential zones, they're allowed there by condition.
churches, schools, elderly homes, things like that are allowed under conditions.
Which all could be part of the conditional use permit anyhow. Because it still requires a conditional use
Yeah.
permit, so why would we make a rule for somebody that's becoming any of the conditional use?
So our current, our current ordinance
If they add on,
allows
they gotta come.
75% of an 80 by 150 foot lot to be covered. And that does need to be changed.
That's too much.
Yeah, you're covering too much of a residential lot.
Yeah.
So we do need to change that.
And if you wanted to do a relatively simple change, it said for, lots that have a single-family home, or maybe even a two-family home on them, you go with this 33% plus 10%. And then everything else, like apartment buildings and schools and all that, you stick with the 75%. That would be a relatively simple change that we could make on the fly, but otherwise, if you just want to pass it the way it is, and then we come back to the issue of apartment buildings and schools and churches and parking lots.
We somehow,
Deal with that as a separate.
like Jared was saying, those have to come through